Ladies, rather, and gent, one gent.
Ladies and gent.
Okay. Yeah. Are we on? The joys of technology. Yeah. Okay. Kia ora koutou, everybody in the room. So we have myself, Councillor Sophie McInnes, we've got Councillor Lydia Glidden, and we have our lovely staff members, who may or may not want me to mention them by name. Welcome to the deliberations, to anybody who happens to be watching this live or later. We'll start with a karakia. Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga, kia mākina ki ngā ki uta, kia mātaratara ki tai. E hi ake a nā te atakura, he tio, he huka, he hauhu, ti hei mauri ora. We have no apologies because we're all here. We have nobody in the public gallery, so that's all good. And I don't believe there's any conflicts of interest. Otherwise, we wouldn't be the people who are here. No. To start with, I'd like to acknowledge everybody who submitted on these proposed closures. We're considering 3 proposed water race closures at this point, 2 on Telegraph Road and 1 on Highfield Road. And we had 9 submitters. We had 3 come to speak to us 2 days ago at the hearings. The remainder are accepted as written submissions. I believe they have been read and considered. So thank you very much for all the time and the effort put in by those who spoke, but also those who wrote. There was some really good information in there. Now, we have also on the agenda the staff report that was presented to the Council back in October. So that was accepted by Council then. And we also have minutes from our hearing 2 days ago. I don't have any amendments to make to that. I don't know if you do, Lydia?
It was just some minor administration details that we can look at later.
Okay.
But nothing, no real material changes to the minutes.
Yeah. Okay. At a couple of times I noticed that a female person was referred to as he.
Yeah, that's
but
administration details
yeah,
I'm talking about.
That's not material.
No.
The words that were recorded were spoken. So move to accept the minutes.
Happy to move.
Okay, I'll second them. All in favour?
Aye.
Okay, so that part is done there. Now, following the submissions and the hearings, we did both ask a few questions of staff. So, one of my questions was how the rates we take for water races and the amenity rate are spent currently. Would you be able to answer that, please, Jo?
Absolutely, no problem. So, so the total water race budget across the 10-year period of the long-term plan is 73.8 million. And 80% of the budgeted expenditure goes towards maintenance, insurance, electricity, consent monitoring, depreciation. So it's around our expenditure. 9% of what is budgeted is for asset renewals. So that's for things like small gates, pipes, equipment that needs replacement because it's reached the end of its life. We have 3% of what is budgeted goes towards our capital projects. So they're for slightly more significant upgrades and improvement projects, such as mudfish protection or very major maintenance items like cleaning of silt ponds and larger bank repairs. We have 4% of the budget is for support charges, which includes things like staff costs, and 3% of the budget is for operating projects, which might include things like investigation, consenting, and ecological assessment, and asset valuations.
Okay, so the vast bulk does actually go into just keeping it all running.
Operating the network, yeah, absolutely.
Yep. Okay, thank you. Luke, would you be able to answer the question regarding enforcement powers around the bylaw, please?
Yep. Would it help if I turn this mic on? So council has enforcement powers under our bylaw, which goes under the Local Government Act, Section 228. So the bylaw specifically prohibits obstruction of flow of water, fences in the waterway, placing structures in the waterways. The bylaw also outlines responsibilities to repair and maintain private races, which is found in sections 8 and 9, and removal of matter and debris from the races. Owners or occupiers of properties can be required to remove obstructions from the race if flow is obstructed. There are penalties that exist under the bylaw if required. Landowners failing to do their maintenance will be given clean notices, and if not complied with, council will do the work and on-charge the cost back to the landowner. We also encourage any landowner who needs advice on how to maintain a water race to contact council.
Thank you very much. I also asked whether there were any photos available of the specific closures, partly because many of our submitters were speaking about biodiversity values and the value of just having running water nearby. And we do believe these particular water races are currently dry, and it was just to see if there was any visual evidence of that. And you've replied that a site inspection will be carried out ahead of the council meeting, but there's not currently any photos available. Do you want to speak to that at all?
That is correct. There's no specific photos of these races right now that I can provide, but we will get some of those shortly. In lieu of that, I did a bit of an imagery analysis. So I used various different platforms like Salon's Maps, Canterbury Maps, Google, and so on, and looked at some of the historical imagery to try and figure out what the period is that these races may or may not have been there for prior to this application. Looking through that and just various sort of sources to confirm, it looks like most of these races are indeed all closed already at the closure points that are indicated in the summary of proposal map. And going back in time to figure out how long ago this has been done as well, even from the 2015 to 2019 imagery, I can see that these races are already not there. So oftentimes these races, some of these applicants come in here because they bought a property at some point in the past, and these races were closed before they've even got there, which I certainly can confirm for some of them. It took a bit of analysis anyway to figure it out, but once you look at the imagery close up, you can sort of see where the channels do run and so on, where they don't go, where it looks like there's a stop or they've been filled in. And that is consistent with what I found here as well.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Luke. Do you want to go through your questions, or I can ask them? Yep.
I can do that. I asked around the location of affected parties if it wasn't 100%, so you provided that through to me, Luke, and I don't really have any concerns there that they're adversely affected in that, so thank you for putting that through. I did ask for the ecological impact report, and it is a sizable report, and so that's where the imagery that you have provided with us helps with that, noting that these current water races are closed. And I asked about the cleaning guidance and requirement, and so you've already sort of touched on that, and that was around the comment in the submissions around stating that limited people are cleaning them mechanically, and so I just wanted to highlight the importance of cleaning the races to keep the water running is quite important. And I'd asked on a bit of guidance around chemically spraying water races. So I don't know if you have any guidance to provide on that.
So you're correct, and it is essential that water races are maintained, not just for the landowner who the race runs through, that affects them if it blocks up and floods, but also to give everyone downstream a fair use of the water race as well and have it there. We do have a bit of guidance on our website, on Selwyn District Council's website under water races, and over there you'll be able to find all kinds of things like responsibility, what chemicals the council uses, our spray plans and so on, which are consented. It is a mixed bag probably across the region for how people maintain their races. Standard practice, I suppose, for large stretches would be some kind of mechanical cleaning, I imagine, and in most farms. But there are sections of races that are hand cleaned as well that have been planted out and so on. And there are sections that, naturally seem to flow perfectly well and don't necessarily need much cleaning either. There is a bit more information on our website on this, which I linked into just my response I sent. We recommend only spot spraying where necessarily. I know that was brought up in the hearing as well. A blanket spray approach is not what we would recommend necessarily because it does have effects on erosion and bank stability. So where you do spray, we try and just do a targeted approach where possible, and if there's grass and so on, just to mow it or brush cut it like usual.
And I guess this is where the irony in this is, if we're saying some of these are ecological areas, we're mechanically cleaning, we're spot spraying, that all has an adverse effect on an ecological area. So I feel like we're really stuck in the middle here around how we progress forward with what the original intention of a water race was and what is potentially changed into now. But noting that might actually need to be a discussion that we have as a whole council and how we actually push or how we move forward as a council with this and lessen the burden on some people so they are happier for them to remain on their property and the community's amenity values and ecological values that they see with them. So I see it as a wider discussion that Sophie and I might actually have to take back to council and whether we incorporate that into our rating review before the next long-term plan to actually assess and say, hey, how could we do this better, and put some options out to our community, because we've got to find some type of change in this, because this process I guess is hard for everybody, landowners, staff, community, and how can we make this better and find the middle ground and keeping everyone happy.
Yeah. So I just want to note that there are many of our submitters who were opposing the closure of these races. It wouldn't have been clear at the time that, by the sound of it, these races, the ones that we're discussing today at least, were informally closed by landowners some time ago, and we have no way of tracking when exactly that was. So that also speaks to how well we're tracking the state of our network, which is something else we need to take back to council in general. If we want to do well by this, then we actually need to know what we have. A couple of the other points that were raised, though, was that when water races are, at least, even if they're closed, is it worth keeping them open rather than filling them in? And I'm aware that some of the landowners here would like to infill them because they find the great divot in the bit of the paddock or on the side of the road inconvenient. However, in terms of flood risk, that would be interesting to be something to. I'm not going to say that we can make a ruling or anything on that because we can't. This is a water race closure hearing. But in terms of going forward, we probably need to assess whether that is genuinely a thing that we need to be concerned about, because if we close all of the races, not that we want to close all of them, but if every race that is closed is infilled and that makes flood risk worse for the landowners and those surrounding them, then that is actually a district-wide issue. I also want to note that several people mentioned the value that water races provide in terms of fire. Now, several of these landowners here will be on CPW and irrigation land, so they do have alternative means of water, but that's definitely something to think about for people who do not have access to that as an alternative source of water. And in terms of resilience as well, if there's an earthquake, and I'm not entirely certain what the backup power generation or the power usage is for those who receive water from an irrigator. But again, there's so many different interconnections between different things, and that's beyond the scope of this particular hearing. We come out of it with more questions than answers, don't we? So I'm going to move that we accept these 3 requests for water race closures, because effectively we are just formalising what is reality. They are already effectively closed. I don't want to see this really, though, as an encouragement for people to close races and then come 5 years later and ask, can we can we formally close it? Because we already did it. But yeah, for these three, I'm happy to move that. Do you want a second, Lydia?
Yeah. Look, I'm happy to second this. And I know what you're saying, Sophie, is that this isn't an encouraged process to close them and then come to us because I guess it's a little bit frustrating to go through this process for something that's already done. And I note what you're saying around there is merit in retaining some of the across land flows to mitigate overland flow of water, and it's something that I guess going forward we need to consider, and something that potentially you could say actually here is an across land flow, and especially if you looked at amalgamating land drainage and water races together, then it might actually give you the same sort of amenity in that and protection of our townships, and especially above the townships if these things are happening. We don't want to see overland flows going into our townships. So I think there is real merit in considering that. And just on the fire, I note that FENZ isn't a stakeholder in this, and they are given a chance to see this and submit on it. And if you are, excuse me, talking about people that are on irrigation and having other means of water, you are right. There are hydrants and that can be used, and most farmers run a generator backup if you are out of power. But noting if you've got an AF8, you might not have your aquifer. Well, your aquifer might shift too. So
Yes.
There are some other issues to consider in this, but I don't think that's really in the scope of what we're talking about today. So happy to second, noting that we need to take a bigger conversation away to council and how we move forward in this.
Yeah. Okay. All in favour? Aye. Yeah. Okay. So in terms of those races, we have agreed that yes, they'll be formally noted as closed. We have got some things going forward that we would like to recommend that council would consider around flood risk, fire risk, rating review, because again, many submitters who are not necessarily directly affected landowners expressed that they see value potentially beyond what the current amenity rate covers for the protection of or the maintenance of water races. So I think that's a discussion that is worth having as part of the rating review, and also potentially trying to work out whether the rating that we have, the general district-wide rate that we have for land drainage and stormwater, should that all become one thing? Again, much bigger discussion than this hearing, but it's based on points raised by our submitters. I also want to note that recently there's been a lot of work going on around land drainage and how they should be cleaned. The land drains should be cleaned while maintaining biodiversity values and all that sort of thing, and whether there's some sort of commonality that could be considered for guidance for water races. In the sense of, as Lizzie has mentioned, keeping the water free flowing, but without impacting the biodiversity, the ecological values too hard. And one last thing I want to note is that when these closures were proposed and when the submissions were made originally, Selwyn District Council hadn't yet adopted the One Water strategy. And going forward with things like the rating review, we do need to be mindful that that strategy is now a thing, and it does have several. Trying to open it now. I'm sure I've got it around here somewhere. Here we go. There are several of the goals and policies that would relate to water races around resilient infrastructure, protecting and enhancing access to water for recreation, mahikakai, connecting communities to water, and just generally acknowledging that water is water, and the fish and the insects and the plants actually don't necessarily care whether it's an artificially man-made constructed stream. To them it is a stream, and they have value as well. I did note that at least one submitter described water as a commodity, but it's actually a natural resource. And I can see why, as a landowner and a farmer, they would consider it more of a commodity, particularly when it's in a water race. But that's part of that wider discussion around how do we as a population value water more generally, I think. So that's why we need that wider discussion, from my point of view. Do you want to add anything else there?
No, yeah, I note the One Water strategy, and that is where we need to discuss what are the water races and how do they link into that, and you know, is it an efficient use of water as well if we're losing 70% to ground? So there's a pretty big discussion that we need to have outside of the scope of what this
Groundwater is useful too. We drink it.
Yes, well, that's right. And so, yeah, there needs to be a consideration because effectively we're taking water from a river and adding it to somewhere else effectively. So, there needs to be a big discussion outside of what the scope of today is.
Okay. Now, I just want to double check with our staff. Is there anything else that we needed to cover before closing this meeting, these deliberations? We've accepted all the submissions, we've discussed, we've moved. Okay. I'm going to declare us closed and say we karakia, unahia, te pau, kia wātia, ai kua wātia. Thank you very much. And thank you very much to staff also, and to our submitters again. Kia ora.